Rain slams against the tank like it is trying to wash the fire off the earth, but the flames keep crawling through the valley, licking the metal, hissing with every drop. Inside, the air tastes like burned oil and fear. My heartbeat bangs against my ribs while the storm outside fights, the fire we helped start. Neither side willing to give in. Mason curses under his breath as sparks dance across the site. Eli keeps swallowing hard like Hez trying to push down a scream, and all I can hear is the steel groaning beneath us like it knows what we've done. The world outside flickers between darkness and orange light as the wind throws smoke at us, burying the shapes moving in the mud. Every mistake echoes louder in storms like this. Every order feels heavier, and when the shadows outside turn into people running for cover, not soldiers, just scared shapes lit by our fire, my breath freezes because I know what we set in motion. In this storm of flame and guilt, one question stabs through everything. If we started the fire, do we have the right to pretend we can stop it? The storm begins to drift east, but its echo stays trapped inside the tank with us. The world outside dims to gray shapes and mud-slick hills while the fire we left behind keeps burning in my head. Eli keeps wiping his hands on his uniform like he's trying to scrub off something only he can feel. Mason stares through the gun sight, jaw clenched, pretending he doesn't notice the figures we saw running. The engine hums beneath us, steady but tired, like it wishes it could turn around. Rain drips through a seam overhead, landing on my wrist like a reminder that the sky is still watching. Command crackles in the headphones, but their words feel distant, clean, untouched by the dirt we're carrying. Every mile we move forward feels like we're sinking deeper into something we won't climb out of. I tell them to stay sharp, but the truth is sharp enough already. And when the valley behind us disappears into the fog, I wonder if the fire ever truly stays behind, or if it travels with you, waiting to speak again when everything else gets quiet. The tank crawls through the valley like an animal that has lost its strength. Stones grind under the treads, and mist twists around the barrel, as if trying to pull it down. I can feel the crew's silence pressing in. Even the radio seems scared to speak. Eli finally breaks, whispering if we should have done something different, but the words hit the floor like dropped rounds, heavy and dangerous. Mason tells him to focus, though his own voice cracks just enough to betray him. The hills around us grow taller, darker, like they're closing in to judge us. I breathe slow, but the guilt rides with every inhale, thick as smoke. A shape flickers through the fog. A ruined farmhouse, half collapsed, windows blackened. Another reminder that the war is always one step ahead of us. I tell the crew to hold steady, but my own hands tighten as we roll past the wreckage. Some fires die in the rain. Others live in the ruins they leave behind. The fog thins as we reach a narrow bend, the kind that makes every soldier hold their breath. The air feels colder here, like the mountain itself is warning us. Mason signals movement on the ridge. Small, quick shapes darting between rocks. My pulse jumps and I tell Eli to get ready, though his fingers hesitate over the shells. For a moment, the ridge goes still. Then a flash, metal catching light. I shout for everyone to brace, but nothing comes, only silence, so tight it feels like the world is holding the trigger. The tank's engine idles, low, rumbling like an uneasy stomach. I lift the binoculars, but the shapes have vanished, swallowed by the stone. Maybe scouts, maybe ghosts, maybe our own fear bouncing back at us. We push forward, each second stretching thin. And the question we don't ask hangs over us. If the enemy is watching, what do they see in us now? By the time we reach the clearing, the storm has faded into a cold drizzle, but the quiet that follows feels wrong. The ground is torn with tracks, boots, wheels, and something dragged. Daniel orders a halt, and the tank settles into the mud with a low groan. Eli looks out the side port and whispers that he sees cloth caught in the branches. I step out first, rain tapping my helmet like nervous fingers. The clearing smells like wet earth and something older, something metallic. Mason joins me, jaw tight, eyes scanning every corner. Then we see it. A small satchel lying open in the mud, papers soaked, a child's wooden toy half buried beside it. No bodies, no voices, only the storm's quiet apology. The crew gathers around the satchel, and for the first time since the fire, no one speaks. Some truths don't need sound to scream. Morning drags itself over the mountains like a wounded thing, leaving pale light that feels too thin to warm anything. The tank growls forward, mud clinging to its treads like hands refusing to let go. Command repeats the same order again. Push north. Hold the line. But the words feel hollow inside this metal shell. Eli keeps glancing at the satchel we found, the toy still resting on his lap like it's judging him. Mason tries to act steady, but his foot taps the floor in a nervous rhythm that doesn't stop. I pretend I don't notice. But the truth sits between us heavier than any shell. The road narrows, and the air changes, sharp and tense, like the ground knows something we don't. I lift the periscope and see flickers of movement near a ravine. Fast, purposeful, practiced. Someone's watching us, maybe waiting. The engine rumbles louder, almost warning us to turn back. But turning back isn't something war ever gives you. As we crawl closer, I can't shake the feeling that whatever waits ahead isn't meant to be survived. The road curves along a cliffside, leaving us exposed on one side and blind on the other. Mason whispers that he hates paths like this, the kind where you feel like the world is holding its breath. Eli keeps turning the toy in his hands, thumb rubbing the smooth edge, as if trying to comfort it. Or maybe himself. Shadows ripple along the slope. Above us, sliding between trees with careful intent. I signal for the engine to slow, and the tank groans as it eases down to a crawl. Every sound stands out now. The hum of the motor, the clatter of loose gear, Eli's shaky breathing. Then the radio crackles with a faint voice, sharp and rushed. Possible ambush, North Ridge. The words fall inside the cabin like stones. I tell the crew to brace, but the silence that follows feels even worse than the warning. The trees sway gently, almost mockingly, as if they're waiting for something we can't see, but can already feel crawling toward us. We stop at a break in the trees, a place where the road widens just enough to breathe, but the air still feels tight. Mason swears he saw movement again, this time closer, low to the ground. Eli asks if it could be civilians, but Mason shoots that down with a shake of his head. These shapes know how to move in silence. I scan the ridge through the binoculars, but the fog hangs thick, turning every rock into a maybe. The radio hisses with static before a new voice cuts through, familiar and steady. Lieutenant Helen Park. She says her patrol spotted enemy scouts in the area and warns us not to trust any quiet. Her tone is calm, but underneath it sits something tired, something worn thin. She orders us to meet her unit 2 miles ahead. I relay the command, though every part of me knows we're heading straight into whatever left those tracks in the clearing. As we push onward, the silence around us tightens like a noose. The forest thickens as we move north, branches scraping the armor like fingers dragging along a coffin lid. Lieutenant Park's voice trails off the radio, leaving us with nothing but the hum of static. Eli finally speaks, asking what happens if the scouts have already circled behind us. Mason mutters that we'll deal with it when it happens, but the tremor in his tone betrays him. I keep my eyes on the path ahead, though every instinct screams that something is wrong. Then the tank rolls over a patch of earth that feels too soft. The hull dips slightly. Eli freezes. Mason curses. I feel the weight of the world sink a little deeper. I order the crew to hold, and for a moment the forest goes dead still, like it's waiting for us to understand the mistake we just made. The smell of damp soil rises strong and sudden, and my stomach tightens because that softness wasn't natural. It was placed. The moment stretches thin, like the world is holding its breath just to watch us break. Mason whispers the word none of us want to hear. Mine. Eli's face drains of color, and I can hear his heartbeat in the awful quiet. I tell everyone not to move. The engine idles low, barely more than a whimper. Outside, the forest feels too calm, too patient, like it already knows what comes next. I scan the ground and see faint shovel marks, soft edges, the kind of work done in a hurry, but by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever set this trap expected us, maybe watched us, maybe still is. Eli asks in a thin voice what we do now, and I tell him the truth. You pray the earth stays still while you decide which risk kills you slower. The air feels thick enough to choke on, and somewhere deep in the trees, a single twig snaps. Not loud, just enough to tell us we're not alone. And we never were. The tank sits frozen above the buried mine, but the forest around us refuses to stay still. The shadows shift with quiet intent, and every breath we take feels borrowed. I order the crew to ease the weight backward, slow enough that the earth won't snap. The treads groan, protesting every inch. Eli squeezes, his eyes shut like he's afraid to watch his own fate move beneath him. Mason mutters a prayer he never admits to knowing. When the tank finally clears the soft dirt, the release is so sharp it almost hurts. We inch forward until the ground feels solid again, and only then do we see it. Small footprints near the trees. Too small to belong to any soldier. Eli spots something wedged in the roots, and his voice wavers as he points. I step out cautiously, mud swallowing my boots, and as I push aside the wet leaves, I find a threadbare sleeve. And inside it, a boy curled like a wounded animal, staring at me with eyes that have seen too much to ever forget. The boy doesn't speak. He only watches us with eyes that tremble between fear and exhaustion. I lower my hand slowly, palm open, letting him decide if I'm danger or breath. Eli whispers that he's hurt, pointing to a gash along the boy's arm wrapped in muddy cloth. Mason keeps scanning the trees, jaw locked, expecting someone to lunge out of the fog. But no one comes. No footsteps. No voices. Only the boy, alone. I ask him in the simplest words I know if anyone else is here, but he only shakes his head, small and sharp, like he is afraid the truth itself might bite him. When I lift him gently, he doesn't resist. He just winces and curls closer as if trying to disappear into the hollow of my chest. Inside the tank, Eli clears a space, pushing aside gear with frantic hands. Mason hesitates, eyes narrowing, but he doesn't argue. The boy's trembling, soaked and half-starved, and as the hatch closes behind us, I feel the weight of him settle into a place inside this war we never prepared for. The tank becomes a cocoon of breath and whispers as we move deeper into the valley. Jai-hun sits between Eli and me, small shoulders shaking every few minutes like he's fighting memories we can't see. Eli offers him a canteen, and the boy drinks with slow, cautious sips, as if expecting the water to vanish halfway. Mason keeps his eyes glued to the sight, but his voice has softened. He asks if the wound is deep. Not out of duty, but something closer to concern. The boy finally speaks a single word, family, and points back toward the forest we crawled out of. The way his voice cracks makes something inside me twist. I tell him we'll try to understand, but he only lowers his head and presses the toy we found earlier against his chest. The rhythm of the tank echoes around us, steady and low, and for a moment, the war feels strangely far away. Yet the boy's silence tells us a truth louder than gunfire. Whatever happened to his family is not behind us. It's somewhere up ahead. We stop near a ridge where the trees bend away from the wind, forming a crooked shelter. Ji-hun stiffens the moment we halt, clutching his toy tight enough to whiten his knuckles. Eli asks softly what he sees, but the boy doesn't answer. He steps toward the ridge instead, pointing to the valley below with a trembling hand. I follow his gaze and my stomach tightens. A burned village sprawls along the riverbank, roofs collapsed, smoke still drifting from blackened beams. Mason mutters that this must be what he ran from. The boy nods once, slow and heavy, like it hurts to remember. I kneel beside him and ask if anyone survived. He doesn't speak. He just raises 2 fingers, then closes one. One survivor. Eli breathes out sharply. I feel the weight of the war settle between us again, cold and sharp. The boy steps closer to me, eyes full of a question he's too afraid to voice. Will we help him go back? We descend toward the village with caution carved into every step. The air grows heavier, thick with a smell that clings to memory and never lets go. Burned wood, wet soil, sorrow. Ji-hun walks ahead of us, small but determined, his feet tracing paths he once knew by heart. Oh, the closer we get, the clearer the destruction becomes. Shattered walls, scorched trees, belongings scattered in the mud, like abandoned stories. Eli kneels beside a broken lantern, turning it gently, as if afraid it might crumble. Mason keeps scanning the edges of the ruins, jaw tight with the weight of knowing danger doesn't always leave when the flames die. Ji-hun stops at the doorway of a collapsed home, his breath shaking. I place a hand on his shoulder, but he steps inside alone. After a moment, he emerges holding a scrap of cloth. Small, colorful, handmade. His eyes lift to mine, full of a pain deeper than words. And I understand. This wasn't just a village. This was his world. The sky dims as we push deeper into the valley, the clouds sinking low like they want to smother the world before anything else burns. Ji-hun sits between Eli and Mason, silent but alert, eyes fixed on every shadow that moves. The tank's engine rumbles like a tired heartbeat, steady but strained. I can feel tension building in the cabin, heavy enough to press against the walls. Mason mutters that the enemy scouts must be close, and Eli tightens his grip on the wooden toy, like it's the only thing that can anchor him. As we round a bend, the trees thin out to reveal jagged cliffs on both sides, walls rising like jaws ready to close. The wind rushes through the gap with a hollow whistle that sounds too much like warning. Ji-hun taps my arm and points upward, his small hand trembling. I follow his gaze and see brief flashes of movement. Silhouettes darting across the ridge. They move with purpose, with coordination, with intent. The kind that means this valley isn't a path. It's a trap waiting to snap shut. We stop at the valley's throat, the tank idling low as the air tightens around us. The ridge above is quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels placed rather than natural. Mason flicks off the safety with a tense snap. Eli whispers if we should retreat, but the path behind us is narrow and twisted. Turning around would take too long. Ji-hun presses himself against the metal wall, eyes darting between us as if trying to understand who will make the first wrong move. I tell the crew that we hold our position and wait for Lieutenant Park's unit, though my voice feels thin even to me. The wind carries a faint metallic scent, almost like dust mixed with gunpowder. Then the sound comes, soft at first, then clear. Stones tumbling down the ridge. Not from nature, from footsteps. Eli's breath catches. Mason raises the barrel slowly, tracking the unseen shapes above. I ready the radio to call for support, but even before I speak, I know the truth. Whoever is up there isn't waiting, they're preparing. No, the enemy hits first. Not with bullets, but with sound. A single whistle slices through the air, sharp and quick, the kind used to signal coordinated strikes. Mason curses and swings the barrel to the left just as figures emerge from the ridge, shifting between rocks with deadly ease. I order Eli to brace, and the tank shudders as Mason fires the first round, the blast echoing across the valley like a breaking bone. Ji-hun clamps his hands over his ears, shrinking against the seat. Incoming shots ping against the armor, sharp metallic screams that rattle the cabin. Eli shouts that movement is flanking us on the right, and I swing the periscope to see shadows cutting across the lower slope. The ambush is tight, practiced, ruthless. They've boxed us in from high and low. Mason reloads with fast, clipped motions, fear hidden under muscle memory. I radio for Park, voice shaking despite me. The only answer is static. A silence far more dangerous than bullets. Smoke begins to fill the valley as the fight grinds on, turning daylight into a dim, shifting haze. Mason hammers out another shot, but the ridge keeps spitting shadows that refuse to stay still. Eli shouts that the right flank is closing fast, and when I glance through the periscope, I see them. 3 figures sprinting downhill, using the rocks as cover. I yell for reverse, and the engine roars, pushing us back inch by inch. Ji-hun reaches for my sleeve, eyes wide with a fear that cuts deeper than the battle itself. The treads grind against loose stone, slipping before catching again. Mason switches to the coaxial gun and sweeps the slope, the bursts echoing like pounding fists. A sudden explosion rocks the left side, throwing all of us sideways as dirt rains through the hatch seam. Eli groans, clutching his shoulder, but forces himself upright. The attack is tightening like a rope around our throats, and I know the truth as the smoke thickens. We can't hold this valley much longer. Something has to break. Just when the valley feels ready to crush us, a new sound cuts through the chaos. Engine growls, fast and strong, coming from the north. Mason pauses mid-reload, eyes narrowing. Eli lifts his head, hope flickering through the haze. I swing the periscope and spot them emerging from the smoke. Armored jeeps and infantry pushing hard, their formation tight and purposeful. At the front stands Lieutenant Helen Park, calm even in the storm, signaling her unit forward. Relief hits me so fast it almost knocks the breath out of my chest. Her troops unload a fierce barrage that forces the attackers back toward the cliffs. Ji-hun watches with round, trembling eyes as the tide shifts. I call out to Park, and she answers with a short nod before shouting orders to secure the ridge. For the first time since the ambush began, the valley breathes. But as the smoke drifts and the echoes fade, understanding settles in. If they set a trap this deep, they know we're coming. And they're preparing for something far worse. Night settles over the ridgeline like a thick blanket, muffling the echoes of the battle we barely survived. The air smells of burned powder and cold stone, a mix that clings to the lungs long after the gunfire stops. Park gathers us near the tank, her voice low but firm as she tells us they found a notebook on one of the fallen scouts, pages filled with coordinates, sketches of villages, and notes written in hurried strokes. Eli listens with wide, uncertain eyes while Mason leans closer, jaw tightening with every word. There's something wrong in the way Park pauses, almost as if she's choosing which truths hurt least. When she hands me the notebook, the pages feel damp and fragile, soaked not just with rain but something heavier. I flip through it and see familiar shapes, paths, bridges, the burned village we visited earlier. Ji-hun stands behind me, shaking when he recognizes the symbols. The truth hits all of us at once. The destruction wasn't chaos. It was planned, precise, carried out by more than one side. And suddenly, the valley feels colder than any winter. We retreat into the tank to get out of the wind, though the cold seems to follow us inside, seeping through metal seams and into our bones. Eli sits opposite me, staring at the notebook like it might leap from my hands and bite him. Mason crosses his arms, shoulders rigid, eyes locked on the boy, who hasn't stopped shaking since the ridge. Park stands near the hatch, explaining that the symbols in the notebook don't match one faction. They match several, tangled together like threads of blame no one wants to claim. I feel Ji-hun tug my sleeve, pointing to a page marked with a rough drawing of a river bend and a small mark beside it. He knows that place. His voice barely rises above a whisper as he says the word, home. Ali's breath catches. Mason's jaw drops slightly, realization settling in like a stone sinking into deep water. Park steps closer, tracing the mark with her finger. It's a site scheduled for artillery fire. Soon, the room goes silent as the truth sharpens. We might be the only chance to stop another village from being erased. We move out fast, the tank growling through the night toward the river bend. The moon hides behind drifting clouds, leaving the world lit only by the occasional glow of distant fires. Inside, the silence is heavier than armor. Eli runs his thumb over the wooden toy again and again, each motion small and desperate. Mason keeps glancing at Ji-hun, something softer slipping through his usually stern eyes. I study the map taped to the console, checking and rechecking the distance to the strike zone. Park sits atop the turret, scanning the horizon through night goggles, her voice cutting through occasionally to guide our path. The boy finally speaks, naming the people who live near the river. Neighbors, friends, the last threads of his world. His voice cracks on the final name, and Eli reaches out, placing a hand on his shoulder. The tank rattles over stones as we push closer, and every bump feels like a countdown. The truth in that notebook is no longer ink. It's a clock ticking towards someone else's fire. We reach a ridge overlooking the river, just as the first artillery flare arcs across the sky, its eerie glow spreading like a warning no one asked for. Park curses under her breath and orders us to cut the engine. The sudden quiet feels like the world holding still in fear. I climb out beside her, the cold biting hard at my face. Down below lies the small cluster of homes Ji-hun called his last safe place. The boy crawls out after Eli, his breath shuddering as he stares at the rooftops barely visible in the pale light. Mason sets up the binoculars, scanning for any signs of movement. He spots figures, families rushing between homes, unaware of the fire about to fall on them. Eli whispers that we have to warn them, but Park shakes her head. The valley is too exposed and the strike could land any second. I feel something snap inside me, a decision too heavy to be made in words. If the artillery won't stop, then we'll have to stop it. Park meets my eyes and, without speaking, nods. She knows the cost. We all do. There's no more time for planning. Only instinct, fear, and whatever courage we have left. Park calls in an emergency halt on the artillery line, but the reply is delayed, scrambled, uncertain. Eli's hands shake as he loads a flare into the launcher, the one signal we hope will force the gunners to pause. Mason steadies him with a firm hand, guiding the barrel upward. The first explosion rolls across the valley, distant but close enough to make Ji-hun flinch. I order the flare fired, and a streak of bright red cuts through the night, burning across the sky like a plea. For a few seconds, the valley holds its breath. Then, slowly, the rumble fades. The guns fall silent. Eli collapses back in relief, Mason letting out a breath he must have held for minutes. Park's shoulders sag, the tension slipping away like a tide left exhausted. Ji-hun watches the village below, waiting for signs of life. When he sees lanterns flicker on and people rushing out to look at the signal, he presses the toy to his chest and whispers something small and grateful. For now, the fire is stopped. But the truth that almost erased them still burns. Dawn breaks slow and pale, the kind of light that feels too thin to melt the frost spreading across the valley floor. The cold slides into the tank like a second skin, settling into joints, metal, and bone. Ji-hun curls beside Eli, wrapped in a blanket Park gave him, though it barely stops the shivers. Mason rubs warmth into his hands, muttering that winter came early just to test us. I study the map again, tracing the path command ordered us to follow. A straight push into a frozen pass where enemy forces were last seen, regrouping. Park says the brass wants momentum. They want the enemy pressed before snowfall makes the mountains impossible. But none of them sit in this tank. None hear the boy's soft breathing or the creak of metal too cold to trust. Eli breaks the silence, asking if stopping one fire means we'll have to start another. No one answers. Outside, the wind howls across the iced ground like it's warning us to turn back. But orders don't bend with weather, they bend people. And sometimes they break them. The tank crawls up the frozen pass, its treads grinding over sheets of ice that crack like thin bones beneath us. Snow begins to fall, soft at first, then heavier, turning the world into a quiet white curtain that hides everything more than a few yards away. Eli grips the bench to steady himself while Mason curses under his breath each time the tank slips sideways. Park rides atop the turret, guiding us with quick hand signals that cut through the snowfall. Ji-hun watches her through the hatch, eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and admiration. I keep the speed low and steady, but the pass narrows, forcing us closer to cliffs that vanish into swirling white. Every sound echoes. The engine, the creak of metal, the wind sliding over the rocks. It feels like the mountains are listening, waiting. Eli whispers that he hates how quiet war becomes before something awful happens. Mason doesn't disagree. Park calls down that we're nearing the choke point, and the cold in her voice has nothing to do with winter. The choke point appears like a wound in the mountain, a narrow slit framed by jagged stone and smothered in drifting snow. Park signals a halt, her boots sinking into the frost as she studies the gap ahead. I step out, the cold biting instantly at my face, and follow her gaze. Tracks mark the snow leading into the pass, fresh and deep. Heavy boots, multiple sets. Mason leans out of the hatch, squinting through the wind, saying this feels wrong. Too quiet, too neatly placed. Eli calls our attention to something half buried near the rocks, a torn scrap of cloth, stiff with frost, the kind worn by civilians trying to flee the fighting. Ji-hun steps closer, trembling, recognizing the pattern. My stomach sinks. Park's jaw tightens as she radios command to report the signs, but the signal cracks with static, barely holding. She turns to me with a look that's part warning, part plea. If civilians are inside that pass, they're trapped, and if enemy forces are hiding there too, then we're walking straight into another fire. The kind nobody walks out of clean. We push into the pass, each yard heavier than the last. The wind funnels between the cliffs, carrying whispers of movement, soft crunches of snow that don't match our rhythm. Eli keeps glancing back, sensing footsteps behind us, even when none appear. Mason's hands hover near the controls, ready to fire at the first sign of danger. Park walks ahead, goggles glinting with reflected frost, her breath coming out in sharp clouds. Ji-hun presses against my side, small shoulders shaking. Then, without warning, a shadow flickers across the ridge. Mason yells for cover, but the first shot lands before the words finish leaving his mouth. A sharp crack echoes, spraying stone near Park's boots. She dives behind a rock, signaling us forward. The tank roars, engine straining against the slope. Snow erupts around us as more shots ring out. Short bursts from rifles hidden among the cliffs. Eli ducks, gripping the seat with white knuckles. I shout for Mason to return fire, but the angles are tight, unforgiving. The pass has become a funnel of ice and bullets, and we're trapped inside it. The fight turns vicious fast, the kind that eats sound and breath until only instinct remains. Mason fires short bursts, trying to flush out the shooters, but their positions are too scattered, too well hidden. Park signals for us to advance, her voice sharp through the radio. If we stay still, we'll be buried here. I force the tank forward, the treads grinding against icy stone, each lurch sending snow cascading from the ridge. Eli shields Ji-hun with his body as another volley strikes the armor, ringing through the cabin like steel screaming. Mason spots movement near a ledge and unleashes a burst that sends one silhouette tumbling down in a spray of white. But more replace it. Always more. Park sprints alongside us, determined and steady, even as bullets tear through the air inches from her. When we finally break past the worst of the choke point, the gunfire thins, fading into the howl of the wind. But the victory feels hollow. Ji-hun buries his face in Eli's coat, sobbing quietly. And as I look back at the narrow pass, now swallowed in drifting snow, I feel a truth settle in my gut. Winter didn't bring the hardest fight. It only warned us what's coming. Indoors, the storm weakens as we reach the valley's edge, but the cold clings to everything like it wants to finish what the bullets couldn't. The tank idles in a small clearing where the wind finally loses its voice. Ji-hun leans against Eli, exhausted from fear and cold, his breaths thin but steady. Park moves ahead with cautious steps, scanning the fading snow for tracks. Mason climbs halfway out of the hatch, his eyes distant, like he's trying to see beyond the mountains themselves. I can feel something heavy in the silence, an understanding that whatever waits ahead will not be easy, clean, or fair. Command's last transmission said reinforcements were pushed back by weather. We're alone. I look at Ji-hun's face, pale and bruised by a world he never asked to survive. Eli whispers we should stop, rest, breathe. But the horizon shows a rising column of smoke that answers for us. Someone's burning something again. But maybe a home. Maybe the truth. Maybe both. Park turns to me and nods once. It's time to end something, though none of us know what that means anymore. We follow the smoke through thinning snow until a ruined outpost comes into view, half swallowed by ice and silence. Mason raises his weapon, scanning the windows. But there's no movement. Not even the wind dares to go inside. The boy clutches Eli's sleeve, nodding toward a door barely hanging from its hinges. Park signals caution, her shoulders stiff with tension. I step forward, pushing the door open with the muzzle of my rifle. Inside, the air feels strangely warm, like a fire burned here not long ago. Scattered papers litter the floor. Maps, lists, code sheets, all marked with symbols matching the notebook we found days ago. Eli kneels to pick one up, his hands trembling as he recognizes the same mark drawn near Ji-hun's village. Mason curses under his breath, anger slipping through a crack. He's held shut for too long. Park moves deeper inside and freezes, her breath catching. In the corner rests a radio still warm to the touch. Whoever coordinated the strikes, they were here moments ago. And judging by the freshly lit tracks heading north, they're still close enough to hear us breathe. We push north along the fresh tracks, each step tightening the knot in my chest. The snow becomes patchy here, revealing dark earth churned by many boots. Not a scouting party, but a coordinated team. Ji-hun walks between Eli and me, his gaze locked on the path like he's following ghosts. Mason signals for a halt when he spots a cluster of crates tucked beneath a large pine. Park approaches first, brushing off the snow to reveal stenciled markings, ammunition, gear, supplies. Not enemy, ours. Eli steps back in shock, voice trembling as he asks why our own supplies are hidden this deep. Park doesn't answer at first. She picks up a crate lid, reading the faded numbers, and her expression hardens like ice forming over still water. I feel the truth settle in my stomach before she even says it. These weren't meant for any battle we knew about. Someone used our own resources to wipe out the villages along this valley. Not just one side. Not just one uniform. The snow around us feels heavier suddenly, like the mountain itself is ashamed to hold this evidence. The truth weighs on us like the mountain pressing down from every side. Park orders us back to the outpost, her voice steady but cracked around the edges. As we move, Ji-hun tugs my sleeve, pointing to a ridge above us. A single figure stands there, wrapped in a heavy coat, watching. Before we can shout, they turn and vanish over the crest. Mason bolts forward, yelling that they might be the one who ran the radio. We break into a run, snow kicking up behind our boots, lungs burning with cold and urgency. The ridge is steeper than it looks, each step a small battle. When we reach the top, the wind slaps us hard, carrying only silence. No footprints, no shadow. Just a vast stretch of white falling away into distant hills. Eli catches his breath and says, maybe they never meant to be found. Park kneels, touching the snow where the figure stood. The surface is disturbed, just enough to show someone was here, but light enough to hide who. The truth flickers inside me like a dying flame. Some ghosts in war breathe, and some choose when to disappear. We return to the tank as the last light of day bleeds into the sky, painting the snow in shades of quiet fire. Ji-hun sits close to Eli, finally breathing steady, though the weight in his eyes hasn't lifted. Mason checks the gun one last time, then lets his hands fall, worn and shaking, not from cold, but from everything we've uncovered. Park stands beside me, staring out over the valley, her expression unreadable. She says softly that some truths in war aren't meant to be spoken because they belong to no single nation, no single soldier. They belong to the silence that waits after the smoke clears. I look at Ji-hun, the last thread of a village nearly erased, and wonder how many stories vanish without anyone left to hold them. The wind calms. The world softens for a moment. Eli asks what we tell command. Park says we tell them what they already know but fear hearing. When I climb into the hatch and the engine growls awake, I feel the valley watching, maybe asking, maybe judging, maybe forgiving. And one question settles in my chest like a slow heartbeat. If the truth survives only in those who carry it, what happens when the carriers are too tired to speak?